From Denmark.
Sweden.
Mexico.
North
Hello from
Germany.
Lithuania.
Houston.
Oklahoma, USA.
Vancouver,
Oklahoma,
Canada.
USA.
Denmark.
North
Houston.
Germany.
Norway,
Aiken.
Slovenia. Heard of both.
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Canada.
The
Florida.
Woodlands, Texas.
Ontario.
Tahoe, California.
England.
BC, Canada.
I'm calling from
Mexico
Baden,
City.
Switzerland.
Switzerland, I heard that one. Lithuania.
Houston.
Post Falls, Idaho.
Berries.
Spain. United Kingdom.
Perfect.
Oklahoma.
Florida.
Indiana.
Florida.
Iowa.
Mexico.
Austria. Ja, Leute.
Slovakia.
San Antonio, Texas.
And Belfast. Hello. Slovakia. Quick note for everybody going to listen to Slovak and Czech. It says Japanese because we didn't have a choice of Slovak and Czech. So choose the Japanese if that's the translation that you would like. Otherwise, we are also translating to Spanish. So everybody who wants to hear in Spanish, Czech, Slovak, choose the Japanese one. And that way you will find it. Perfect. Let's continue. Where are you calling in from? Where haven't we heard? We'd like to hear from you as everybody's still being let in.
Norway.
Oklahoma.
Portugal.
Alberta.
Florida. Kansas.
California.
Germany.
Oregon.
South Africa.
Sweden.
Mexico.
Oklahoma.
Minnesota.
Upstate New York.
Africa.
Wonderful.
Chicago.
North Carolina. Lithuania. I am from Czech Republic. Great things.
Wonderful.
Hello from Cyprus, Sardinia.
Slovenia, Athens, so many people, and we're still letting people in. Fantastic. Okay, well, why don't we get started? In other words, there's people on all over the world. We are going to mute everybody. Because there's always a little bit of background noise when we get started. But how exciting to see everybody all over the world checking in here to hear a little bit about health and wellness on this Nutrition 101. So hello, everybody from around the world. Good to see you here on this Wednesday. So we are going to get started. When you have a lot of people around the world really starting to wake up and try to figure out what is going on in the health and wellness world today, because there's so much out there that can be very confusing. What is right? What is not right? You hear something once about this is good for you, but not too long after that, it's like, this is not good for you anymore. So what is the truth? What is the science really telling us right here and now? Well, today we're going to go deep down into the basics of where is our health today? What is going on with it? And what have we found out about it until now? And what can you do about it for your health? And I'm excited to have our guest speaker on. He is a world-renowned scientist, and yet he's worked his entire life really to boil everything down to what we can do for a better health globally. Now, he has written different books. He has been on different boards around the world, and yet He comes here today, just such a humble. He doesn't want any recognition on that, and yet he is somebody that we all that know him look so much up to him because of the knowledge he has. So if you just look him up, you get so amazed at the background of this man. So we are so honored to have him on here. Let's bring him on right away, Dr. Paul Clayton. Dr. Paul, welcome here. I am so excited to have you on. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Carla, and thank you for having me on. It's just so amazing to see so many people coming in from all around the world. I'm astonished, but I'm delighted to see you all.
You know, Dr. Paul, there are a lot of people really looking into what Zinzino is doing and why, because and what it is that you actually have to do with it. So before we get started, sometimes I start announcing some of the things that you've done, and you're like, oh, I don't want to have that announced. So tell me some of the things that you've done that you're most proud of.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think probably one of the things I'm proudest of is that I was rollerblading in a park in London one time, and this little kid darted out in front of me. And without thinking, I scooped him up and fell backwards, so he fell on top of me. And I did it without thinking. And I thought, well, maybe I'm not such a bad person.
Okay. That just shows your heart, that you are definitely a guy with heart, down to earth, like the rest of us. But Paul, now let's go into a little bit about your science background. You were born from scientific parents. I know you said you didn't read children's books, you were reading physics books when you were young. But some of the things, you graduated in Edinburgh.
I did.
Summa cum
Oh,
laude, to be at the top of your class anyway. But then from there, you actually started to work as a scientist in the science field. You've been a part of different boards. I think one on the food, brain, and behavior. That one is worth mentioning.
well, I was very fortunate to be able to be a part of the Institute of Food, Brain, and Behavior, which nestles under the wing of Oxford University. And the mentors, my mentors, included John Stein, who was the Oxford Professor of Physiology, and a couple of other, I mean, people who are very eminent in the field of omega-3 research. Michael Crawford is another one. He did pioneering work a couple of decades ago on the importance of omega-3s for the developing uh, brain of children in utero and in the year or so afterwards. And it was his work, really, that formed the intellectual justification for including long-chain omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids in infant formula, which was a huge step towards making formula more like breast milk, which is, obviously where it always had to go. It still has a couple of steps to take, but Michael Crawford was instrumental in that. So yes, I sat at the feet of, great scientists. It was a huge privilege to be a part of that. And then, I moved sideways. I have a magpie kind of a mind. I just run after things that glitter. And I've followed, my nose into all kinds of other areas of research. What started off as omega-3s very soon diversified into a whole number of other groups of food derivatives. And for those of you who are familiar with my books, who perhaps visited my blog site, you'll know that I cover quite a large range of topics. The thing is that nutrition really impacts on every aspect of medicine and healthcare. So, in my line of work, I have the wonderful opportunities to talk to people who are experts in their field. Cardiologists and oncologists, and pediatricians and things like that, and I learn from them, and I think that some of the information that I have is useful for them too. So science is a dialectic. It's always, essentially, it always will be a dialectic process. To be part of that dialectic is, again, it's a privilege. It's something that I really enjoy. I've just come back from speaking at a conference organized by Merck in Coimbra in Portugal, which was really about the problems of infertility and there was an audience there of pediatricians and IVF specialists, and it was just illuminating, having the opportunity to talk with them and share with them the information that I have from about pharmaconutrition, and we've determined that we're going to probably do some collaborative work. So I have a lot of yeah. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
That's okay. That's okay. We want to just grab that word, pharmaconutrition. That is something that you have actually been diving really deep in. Now, how did you come up with pharmaconutrition? I know your degree is in pharmaco something or other.
I'm a pharmacologist, a clinical pharmacologist, and I coined the term pharmaconutrition almost 40 years ago now at a meeting at the Committee on Safety of Medicines, which was a forerunner to the English, to EFSA, really. And I was one of the senior scientific advisors. And I remember this meeting, there were, I think, a couple of dozen gray-bearded, very dusty-looking professors. Old men. I'm older than they were at this point in my career, but at that point they seemed very senior. And we were looking at pharmacovigilance. I was presenting pharmacokinetic data. These are all aspects of the use of pharmaceutical products. And I said, well, look, why don't we use some of these principles and adopt this way of looking at the impact of external molecules on physiological systems? And they said, well, what would that be? And I said, I think that would be something called pharmaconutrition. And I have to say that the response was uniformly negative. I was laughed out of the room. They said, this doesn't exist. Do you even know what it means? And I said, but I think what it means is it's the cross-referencing the known pharmacological attributes of different food derivatives against the known metabolic errors that we are involved in the pathogenesis of chronic degenerative disease.
Okay, okay. Now we're gonna, whew, Dr. Paul, we need to understand all of this. We know it is really, I want to dig into getting into how, and I think it makes it really easy because you have a book out there that I think makes it easy for the rest of us to understand how let your food be your medicine. And that just makes sense to me. So that's why we're going to call this Nutrition 101. So we're going to take it down a notch so the rest of us understand. So I remember you telling the story of you were listening to somebody talking in regards to animals. They were talking about how nutrition mattered to animals, and you were kind of thinking, this would make sense for humans. If it's good for animals, why don't we have this kind of thing? And they were talking about different stuff, and that's how we kind of got into nutrition in regards to how it really is impacting the lives of the rest of us, right?
Yeah, sure. Long story short, that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, I'm making it short because we want to get into the nitty-gritty here. So you have been studying things of how we've got to the place that we are in health wise. And you studied like even all the way into the Victorian age, all of the background of things. Can you tell us how we got to where we are today nutritionally? What is going on in the world and I know we're going to talk mostly about the United States, but as you can hear, we've got people on from around the world. So where are we nutritionally right here and now, and before we get into what we're doing about it? Could you kind of give us a background on how things have evolved with
Sure. Well, for those of you who are familiar with Roadrunner cartoons, we've run over the edge of the cliff and we're looking down, and we've suddenly realized the abyss is opening up under our feet and we're starting to hurtle into the depths. We have moved far too far away from our nutritional origins. And that's why sometimes the chronic degenerative non-communicable diseases are sometimes called evolutionary mismatch disorders. That is, we're so far away from the foods, the diets that we were designed to eat. I'm not talking about intelligent design, but the foods that our metabolisms are suited to. We've moved so far away from that that the resulting metabolic errors created by the modern diet and lifestyle, that is what is making us so sick. Now, if you go back to the mid-Victorian era, and I'm a keen student of history and medical history and politics and a lot of other things besides, but we've identified a population who lived in England during the second half of the 19th century who were extraordinarily healthy. Now, if you look at their life expectancy, you have to filter out the first 5 years because, quite a lot of children died at a very young age. But if you survived to the age of 5, you were going to be far healthier for far longer in the 19th century than people are today. And because people were so healthy, well, first of all, they didn't spend very much on healthcare because it simply wasn't necessary. This was also one of the keys to the extraordinary success of British imperialism. So you have to remember that this very small, damp little island off the west coast of Europe at one point controlled a third of the world. Now, there's all kinds of reasons for that, and I don't want to be reductionist about this and say that it was all to do with their great good health. But if you look at the battle plans that were being drawn up by the admirals and the generals of that period, they would draw up their calculations on the basis that one British soldier or sailor would be worth, or the equivalent of, let's say, 3 French, 4 Germans, and 5 Italians. And they weren't just being jingoistic. The British at that time genuinely were stronger, fitter, healthier, more resilient, more adaptable, quicker on their feet, and quicker intellectually than any other nation on the battlefield. And this is one of the reasons why the British Empire expanded to cover a third of the world's landmass. It's quite extraordinary in retrospect. They were eating a diet which was really supportive of amazingly good health. Not only did it mean that they were almost immune to, for example, coronary cardiovascular disease and cancers, which are the 2 scourges of most developed nations' populations today. But they were also incredibly strong, and they healed incredibly rapidly. Their bodies were working at a kind of metabolic and therefore physiological peak fitness, where we're languishing at about 50 or 60%. We have become much more vulnerable. We have become much less fit. And it's clearly the modern diet and lifestyle that is damaging us in this way and is responsible for the multiple pandemics of chronic degenerative disease that disfigure public health today. The United States and North America in general is a little further down that Gadarene slope than many other countries because North Americans have taken so enthusiastically to ultra-processed foods. But those other OECD nations, which are following in America's footsteps as the juggernaut of ultra-processed foods has rolled over the world, are all declining in the same direction. We're following closely after the North Americans. We're ending up in the same in the same sort of chronic stay wards in hospitals and clinics. This is really the reason why healthcare systems everywhere are at or past the point of bankruptcy. They're running on fumes. Wards are being closed down. Healthcare is being rationing. And one of the few politicians who's really, I think, understood this, you might disagree on some of his views, is Bobby Kennedy and the Make America Healthy Again crew, who are trying to reimagine a healthcare system where instead of allowing people to sicken on an extremely unhealthy diet and lifestyle, and then try to patch up the holes, the resulting damage with pharmaceuticals, which is a strategy that is ruinously expensive and very inadequate. It would be better if we could improve general public health by enhancing and improving the public food universe, and then we wouldn't need so much emergency reactive healthcare. So that's.
If I just want to sum up here. So am I getting this straight that years ago, quite a few years ago back in ages, their bodies were healthy and fit and had a lot of energy and everything was working the way it should. And because of the lifestyle, so more sedentary lifestyle and the foods that we're eating, and especially the different foods that we're having, the processed foods in the United States especially is so high, that is what has caused our downfall and is making us with all of these diseases. I mean, we didn't hear of them when I was even younger. Now, you hear of so many diseases now, and it seems to be getting worse. And then so the body is falling apart because of that. And it's a lot of it in the United States, but it is really global. Is that how it's been declining from that? Just to make sure we're being very clear on it. Remember, 101 size.
You've said in 30 seconds what it took me 5 minutes to say. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Well, then we're on course. Okay, so, and actually what we can see is that it's kind of run rampant because now here in the United States, we're a country that they are, putting on a lot of pharmaceutical commercials even to talk direct to consumers about this is how you fix this problem, this problem, this problem. And what we really need to do, or what people are starting to wake up and think about is fixing the cause, not just pharmaceuticals are kind of failing, as you're saying. So we want to fix the initial cause. That's where we're going to go to next, right? So causing, where are we going to go from here?
Well, let's first of all ask why we are where we are. Now, I think that the reason so many of us are so sick and getting sicker younger than we ever previously did is the diet and lifestyle. Why have we developed a healthcare system that is so pharmacocentric, based so heavily on pharmaceuticals? And the answer to that, you have to go back to the end of the 19th century as well. That is when the roots of the current medical system really start to take shape. You have to remember at that time, the major causes of ill health and disease and death were bacterial or viral. They were infectious. And a number of very great scientific ancestors of ours, starting with von Leeuwenhoek and then bringing in Ehrlich and Koch and Pasteur and people like that, laid the foundations for this concept of the magic bullet of specificity. That is a bullet of sorts, which could target the microbe, the cause of the disease, without targeting the man. And it was never, it was actually very successful in some ways in alleviating the burden of chronic degenerative disease, of infectious disease, which was so important then. It wasn't as important as schemes of public sanitation, by the way. They were actually much more important than the antibiotics ever were. Nonetheless, this suited the nascent pharmaceutical industry, who started seeing, well, we can go from semi-synthetic to synthetic molecules, we can build intellectual protection around them, we can profiteer outrageously from these synthetic molecules. And they taught generations of medical students and doctors, you need magic bullets to treat disease. Well, the approach works for infectious diseases. It does not work for chronic degenerative diseases because they are, by and large, not caused by pathogens. They're caused by multiple metabolic errors, which are caused in turn by multiple nutritional defects. Bullets don't work. You need instead support nets, support systems. Okay. And but the medical profession is still absolutely obsessed with this concept of specificity. It is still at the core of much medical thinking. And so the medical model has moved from receptors to subclasses of receptors, from enzymes to isoforms, to, for example, specific genes. And still we have no cures for the chronic degenerative diseases. Now, if you haven't learned from that by now that this is actually fundamentally the wrong approach, that our guns are pointing in the wrong direction, actually we don't need guns at all, then it really underpins the fact that most doctors are not scientists and they don't know much about the history of science or the history of medicine. They're still imprisoned conceptually by this model. If you're using pharmaceuticals to treat chronic degenerative diseases and you never cure anything, that creates this medical nihilism or fatalism. They then say, oh, chronic degenerative diseases cannot be cured. Well, duh, they can't be if you're using pharmaceuticals, but they can be if you allow the body's considerable powers of restoration, recuperation, and healing to come to the fore, which you can do by supplying the body with what it needs and no longer harming it in the way the modern diet and lifestyle does. And I think our entire concept of what chronic degenerative disease actually has to be re-examined. To me, it's nothing to do with wear and tear. It's nothing to do with entropy. It is, in fact, the result of chronic intoxication. Okay. And that chronic intoxication is very much generated by the modern diet and lifestyle.
Well, I get that too, because doctors, even when you go into a doctor, they're asking for your symptoms and then they're giving you the medicine that is going to help fix the symptoms. And what we really want to do is get down and heal it. And as you said, our bodies are actually made to heal themselves. But because of all the things that are going on in here, we are having issues with healing our body. So, and that's where pharmaconutrition is coming in. That's what we are talking about here. And what we're going to have as our main topic today is what do we need to get into our bodies? What kind of pharmaconutrition, what kind of nutrition should we be doing to actually let our bodies heal itself? Like, I know it comes down to getting into the cellular plan. But this is the issue, Dr. Paul. There is so much out there that you hear, this is good for you, this is good for you, this is good for you. And it's an array of different things. And it's hard to really find out what is it that we can do so that our bodies really do heal itself. What is it that we can do? And how do we know for sure that this is going to work?
Okay, let me answer that in a roundabout way. And let me talk to Robert Ferguson, who's saying, will test-based nutrition be discussed? Yes or no? He's obviously impatient. I will get to that because that's at the core of what we do. I'm going to quote François Diderot, who was a French revolutionary who notoriously said that the revolution would not be successful until I think the last clergyman had been strangled by the guts of the last lawyer. And I think that the reason why I want to quote this very interesting revolutionary figure was I think we need to do the same thing to the medical profession. Consider the role of the medic. A generation ago, that medic had more of let me see, almost a socially important therapeutic role. I remember the day when doctors would actually come to your house if you were sick, and they would spend time talking to you. And the act of talking, this kind of communion that took place, was actually an important part of the therapeutic process. That doesn't happen anymore. Because of the rapidly increasing numbers of people who are ill. Doctors simply don't have the time to look at individual patients on that way, and you have 5 minutes per patient, and you give them a pill, and that pill is based on, okay, well, I've run the diagnostic algorithm, and the diagnostic algorithm tells me I've got to opt for these therapeutic choices. The role of the doctor has been vastly diminished, and in my view, could in most cases be very adequately, more than adequately, taken over by artificial intelligence. Why do you even need a doctor? In most cases, we have AI systems which are better at doing these kinds of things than the vast majority of doctors. And test-based nutrition comes in here as well. Test-based nutrition is, in the world of healthcare, it is the equivalent of the Gutenberg press. For the first time, it means that you can access your own inner workings and do something about it yourself. This is no longer the sole purview of a group of elite medical personnel who have been separated out from society, who are no longer a part of your normal life. It's like the modern priesthood, a medical priesthood that we go to, and they will dispense blessings and splinters of the true cross in the form of tablets or capsules to us, which may or may not have some effect on us, and which are very likely, in fact, to cause adverse effects. The adverse effects caused by modern treatments are, as you know, a significant cause of illness and death. Now, the point about test-based nutrition is that it makes your metabolic profile available to you. You no longer have to rely on experts. You no longer have to go to pray, at the altar of your local hospital or clinic. Do your own test, use your own DBS, whatever it is, take your samples, send them off to a third party, validated forensic analytical laboratory, get your results back, and now you can see if there's an issue, which, if you so choose, you can rectify long before that point in time where the disease, if left unchecked, would cause symptoms. This is the same principle that is used in modern automobiles. Rather than running them off the road because you're not monitoring them, modern automobiles are full of systems that monitor the performance and pick up signs of imbalance or malfunctioning very early on, hopefully at a point where they can be corrected automatically, or you can go to the garage and have them corrected before a catastrophic failure. We're making this same principle available within a medical model that people can use themselves to monitor their own health and steer their own health, hopefully thereby reducing the numbers of people who will eventually require primary, tertiary, or secondary health care.
Perfect.
This is absolutely huge.
Hang on. I love it, Dr. Paul, because you get passionate about this and we can feel it. Now, these tests are coming out and tests are here and there on the different tests. But even if a regular person was to say, well, I need to find out what my body is telling me, there's different tests of different things, but you have actually created this health protocol here where you've been following along and working side by side for many years, even before Zinzino got involved. And one of the tests that we started with is the core part of this, and that is a balance test of talking about the omega-6, the pro-inflammatory one, the one that it's essential, but it causes some problems and it gets us into that omega danger zone. And then we have omega-3s, which are also essential, but they're the anti-inflammatory ones that are getting us into an omega safe zone. And that's affecting our cell, which, that cell membrane, that whole cell in there. So could you say, why is that so important? What is this omega balance? Why are we testing for it? And why is it such an important part of finding out what you can do for your health? What is that about?
Well, the cell membrane is predominantly a lipid environment. It's a lipid bilayer, as every life scientist knows, and that's constructed of fatty molecules, which include fatty acids. And the fatty acids, particularly the 6s and the 3s, are there in a ratio which is determined by the ratio of those 6s and 3s in your diet. The 6s are broadly pro-inflammatory. The 3s are broadly anti-inflammatory. Now, until till the end of the 19th century, and probably up to about 1940, up to about the World War II, our intakes of foods were based on basic produce. Ultra-processed food wasn't really a thing before then. And as a result, people's 6-to-3 ratios were in the right general area. That is, they allowed you to create an acute inflammatory response to an injury or a pathogen, which is fine. You need to be able to do that, but did not create so much chronic inflammation that you would eventually develop destruction and loss of healthy tissue. Now, the modern diet not only gives you too much omega-6, not enough omega-3, it creates dysbiosis, type B malnutrition, glycemic mismatch. And what we're trying to do is to test for each one of those things. So the balance test will test your omega-6s and omega-3s, and that tells you a lot about whether you're going to tend to have chronic inflammatory stress or not. Clue that you don't want to have chronic inflammatory stress, and we can monitor that with this particular test.
So tell us a little bit about that. So the chronic inflammatory stress is one of the world's biggest health issues. You hear it on everywhere, how important it is not to have that. So
yeah. Well, chronic inflammatory stress has certainly been picked up and run with by a lot of popular magazines and podcasts. And don't get me wrong, chronic inflammatory stress is a major contributor to chronic degenerative disease, but it's only one of 4 major drivers of disease, and there's probably 2 or 3 minor ones. So the other 3, dysbiosis, where you have the wrong population of microbes in the large intestine, equally important. It's just as important. Type B malnutrition, where you are not deficient but depleted in a lot of cofactors, vitamins, trace elements, and phytonutrients, is a third. And the fourth is the situation where you're metabolically skewed because you're eating too much sugars and starches, and not taking enough physical exercise. Each of these four is important, and we can test for all of them.
Okay, so it is these four issues that is the global issue that people are having issues with. So the chronic inflammation is the first one. The dysbiosis, that microbiome thing going on, and you hear a lot of that. You hear a lot about gut health. You hear a lot about gut brain health, that kind of thing, that connection. So those two, and then you've got type B malnutrition. People aren't getting the right nutrients in their body. And then the sugar going on. We hear all kinds of things about diabetes, things like that. But these drivers, these problems are the four major problems in the world that are creating most of the health problems everybody's having. So almost all the health problems are created by these four drivers. Did I get it right?
I could list you now 60 or 70 chronic degenerative non-communicable conditions, all of which involve elements of chronic inflammatory stress, dysbiosis, type B malnutrition, and glycemic mismatch. They're involved in all of them. I don't want you to run away with the idea that these are the only four drivers of disease. They're really important. But coming up on the rails, we're seeing more issues relating to microplastics and plasticizers, and in certain parts of the world, heavy metals, which is a very strange name because some of the toxic metals are not heavy at all, but because of industrial processing.
But if we, just to make sure we're starting at the right spot, these are the four issues that we're going to talk about here today.
Okay.
That is the major issues around the world that is creating a lot of the health issues. And we can actually do some tests for this, and we can actually do something about it, which is why it's making such an effect and is starting to get a lot of people listening into what Zinzino is doing. So what are we doing in regards to testing this thing nutritionally? What kind of tests, and what is it really telling us about that? So let's take them.
Okay. Well, chronic inflammation, the balance test, talks about your fatty acid profiles in the blood, and that tells us a great deal about whether you're likely to have chronic inflammatory stress or not. If you have the wrong result, you can put it right very easily with a combination of omega-3s, fish oils, and olive oils. You need both, or by eating oily fish. That's the equivalent. If you have dysbiosis, we have blood markers for that too now. Not gut markers. The gut markers are way too complex and they are far too kinetic. They change too rapidly. By looking at certain analytes in the blood, we can tell whether you have the right type of microbiome or not. And guess what? We have a tool that puts that right. In terms of type B malnutrition, we are developing a test for that as well. So here again, do a test. If you have a good result, great. You don't need the product. And I don't think supplement companies should be selling indiscriminately to the public. I think it's a confidence trick, a lot of it. So, but there again, with a test, you can see, do you need it? No, then go away. We'll refund your money. If the test is negative, well, this is potentially going to become a problem over the longer term. So it might make sense to invest in a type B replenishment program. As for the glycemic mismatch, well, doctors are more than familiar with this because you can test long-term glycemic overload by measuring HbA1c, and we know ways of bringing your HbA1c values down. So in each case, there is a test and an effector. Test yourself, see if there's a problem. If there is, here's something you can use to put it right. So it's a closed loop system. This really is something that people love because you can take control over your own health. And with any luck, you'll live a long and healthy life without ever having to bother the medical profession. I'm coming back now to what we saw in the mid-Victorian period in England. At that time, all the diseases that are important today were known. They were recognized. The doctors of the day were perfectly competent, and they could diagnose heart attacks or strokes or cancers at the point of death. They couldn't diagnose them as early as we can. They didn't have the screening and diagnostic techniques that we do, but they could diagnose them at the point of death, and they did so without prejudice. So that is a population that lived as long as we do today, and yet the numbers of people with chronic degenerative disease at that time were only 10% of the numbers, the huge numbers that we see today. And that is really important. 10% ask any cardiologist or oncologist or any medical specialist today, how many of your cases have strong genetic risk factors? And they will typically say about 10%. What that tells us is that in the Victorian era, they were eating and living in such a healthy way that only the people with strong genetic risk factors were developing these diseases. Everybody else was protected. Today, all of those protective factors have been stripped away. The tide has gone down, and now you can see who's been swimming without their shorts on. Everyone else has been made much more vulnerable. And this, in a nutshell, is why our healthcare systems, despite the fact that they've grown like cancers themselves, have proved utterly unable to prevent the decline in public health that we've seen gathering speed over the last 75 years.
Well, we know it's definitely declining, but we really are excited to hear about what we can do about it. So we know that we have these 4 drivers, and we know that we can test things in Zinzino, and then we know that we can actually do things to fix these things, these drivers.
Yeah.
So tell us about the balanced products, because it doesn't matter what you're taking. I mean, maybe I should even start by saying I thought I was really healthy. I mean, I was an American coming to Denmark, living, really healthy, and my test came back when we're not supposed to be more than 3 to 1. I came back at 34.4. It was Denmark's worst test for about 5 years, and they put me in all the brochures, so I can't hide my first test. But Dr. Paul, I know I'm down to 2.8 to 1 now, so I feel very confident. I know how important it is. But I want people to understand, by taking a balanced product, one of the balanced products, what is that going to do for you? We've got a balance oil. We can do it in capsule form. We've even got for vegans. So it doesn't matter what product you're using to get your body into balance. So once you test for it, you can take a product to get yourself in balance and then retest. We can do it. We can show you about this, and we're sending it to an independent lab. It's like a 20-page report that tells you, but it's actually, I say it's kind of like your body telling you what it needs. So tell us a little bit about the balanced product. What is the balanced products really doing, and what is it going to mean to people by getting down into the 3 to 1?
Well, the modern diet gives us very high 6-to-3 ratios, and it gives us very low 3 indices, which means there's very little of the right omega-3s in your cell membranes. That drives you towards chronic inflammation. What we can tell is that if you're eating a lot of oily fish, things like herring and wild salmon and sardines, or if you're taking balance oil, then your 6-to-3 ratios fall, the omega-3 levels come up, and then what we see in clinical terms, we see the symptoms which are caused by chronic inflammation starting to fade away as your 6-to-3 ratio comes up, as your 6-to-3 ratio falls, and as your 3 index goes up. There's a very nice convergence between the test results and patients' symptomatic improvement. In fact, they run in parallel. And
Dr. Paul, people will just say, but they could just take an omega-3. Because if you need to have what is doing?
You can. Well, the omega-3 market is worth billions, and the whole thing is a confidence trick. And the reason is it doesn't work. What you find in oily fish is actually a lot more than you find in fish oil. What is protective in oily fish is actually it's a binary weapon. You need to have the omega-3s, and you need to have a family of chaperone compounds, which are a very interesting subgroup of polyphenols. They go together. They lock together, and the polyphenols protect the omega-3s, allowing them to be transmitted throughout the marine food webs, or if you eat them, to be transmitted through your body into the different peripheral tissues. If you're eating commercial fish oil, basically a lot of it is broken down long before it gets to where it's needed, so you don't ever get the right decline in the 6-to-3 ratio. That's why all the clinical trials say that fish oil doesn't work. Even more worryingly, if the omega-3s are not being protected by the right chaperones, and spoiler alert, D-alpha tocopherol is not the right chaperone. Under those conditions, the omega-3s break down. They form peroxidation end products with names like nonanols. And these are cytotoxic. They kill cells, and this is really interesting. They're arrhythmogenic. We know they cause heart arrhythmia. So the latest data that shows that fish oil may be associated with an increased risk of atrial fibrillation, to me makes a lot of sense. You don't get atrial fibrillation by eating a lot of fish, and you don't get atrial fibrillation by using balance oil, where the omega-3s are protected by the right polyphenols. If you're eating vulnerable, stripped omega-3s, which is what most commercial products are, first of all, they don't work. And, you know, the Cochrane collaboration and all the other people who've done meta-analyses say the same thing. Commercial fish oil doesn't work. But the other thing is you're exposing yourself to potentially quite toxic omega-3 breakdown products. I would not recommend omega-3 products to anyone. And it doesn't matter whether they're from krill or from Arctic salmon or, you know, wherever you're deriving them from. If they're omega-3s on their own, don't take them.
Okay, so if I understand this right, there's a great big difference between fish oil and oily fish. And Zinzino, because of the polyphenols, works like oily fish. So it's like, so we don't have to eat the sardines and the mackerel and the herring. We can just do it really simple with a 1 shot a day. And it's working like eating all that fish. And that's getting the omega into balance, which is making that cell function the way that it's supposed to. Makes sense to me. Healthy cells, healthy body. That's just
Well, balanced oil is effectively oily fish in liquid form. Having said that, I don't have any problems with eating oily fish. I mean, even for breakfast. I'm a Scot. I'm a Scot, and I was raised on kippers and porridge. So the kipper is a wonderful thing. The Arbroath smoky, and those people in the audience from Scotland will know what I'm talking about. It's a rich source of omega-3s and polyphenols, and it tastes wonderful.
Well,
I mean,
I know the Danish people are eating things like that too. I think I'm going
right.
to balance oil instead of you can keep your kippers over there, all that. Okay, so we've got now the balance test, why it's important, why Zinzino has a balance oil. It's totally different. Doesn't matter which balance product you take, whether it's the oil or the capsules, they're all working the same way. They're working like fish. Fish in a bottle, fish in a capsule. So that makes sense to me. And that's fixing some of the things. But then we have also all this microbiome going on. And I know one of the things that we are working to fix all of the microbiome issues is our xenobiotic, that prebiotic fiber. Now, we want to talk about that because you said that is actually one of the formulations that you're most proud of. And for those of you who don't know, yes, and it hasn't been a secret, they are coming out with that microbiome test in Zinzino very soon. And it wasn't something we're not able to say because our founder has said it himself. It's coming very soon. But whatever the test is saying, we've already got what we need to take for it, because Dr. Paul, tell us a little bit about this formulation, why you're so proud of it, what it really does. Could you explain a little bit about the
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, if we're going to get into the test, can I just specify Martina Torreson's excellent work. She's been looking at this for almost a year now, and I can't praise her work sufficiently. She's really been extremely good with this. Very briefly, we don't really know what any of the microbes in the gut is doing. We have some ideas. We think some are good, some are bad, but it's like pre-Westphalian Europe down there, you know, or Game of Thrones, which is based on pre-Westphalian Europe. So you've got these little kingdoms, these different species and tribes, and sometimes they're at war with each other, and sometimes they have uneasy alliances, and sometimes one can take over the responsibilities of another. It's an incredibly dynamic situation, which is affected by every mouthful of food that you eat, by your emotional state, by all kinds of other things. And we don't really know, we still don't really know which of the species are good and which are bad. People have attempted to identify enterotypes. I don't think any of that really works. I think it makes more sense to look at a physiological component, which is colonic epithelial barrier function. Now, normally, the colon should be constructed in such a way so that the toxic macromolecules are kept inside and the bacteria are kept inside. You don't want toxins getting into the bloodstream, or just as bad, enterobacteria getting into the bloodstream and causing problems elsewhere in the body. If you eat prebiotic fibers, it increases the numbers of populations of bacteria which like to eat prebiotic fiber. They're called saccharolytic because these fibers are starches. If you feed them, they produce postbiotics, whole ranges of them, which do a lot of different things. Some of them fight off bad bacteria or kill off things like Candida. Others are short-chain fatty acids, which people in the audience will have heard of, and one of those is butyrate, and butyrate is a powerful anti-inflammatory agent and one which is extremely good at killing off cancer cells. So by eating lots of prebiotic fiber, you upregulate the growth of these bacteria that we loosely call probiotics, and they're making postbiotics that are really helpful for us. So that's the chain of cause and effect. Eat the right fiber, produce the right microbial population. They then become part of a healthy metabolism and a healthy gut, and that has positive implications for your heart, your blood vessels, your brain, your liver, and every other system.
So everything is tied to your gut. It's like that.
Well, Hippocrates said all diseases start in the gut, and I won't say he was completely right, but I think there was a great deal of truth in what he said. And he also said, by the way, if you're ever feeling depressed, go for a walk, and if you're still depressed when you've gone for your walk, go for another one. And now, of course, we know he was right in that respect as well. Physical exercise is indeed a good antidepressant. But the thing is, we used to eat huge amounts of these prebiotic fibers. Go back 2,000 years, the best estimates that we have is that people's diets consisted, almost a fifth of their calorific intake was prebiotic fiber, roots and shoots and tubers and things like that. The Victorian era, that's down to about 40 grams a day now from different sources, such as Jerusalem artichoke. And that is a population that has no IBS, no IBD, and colorectal cancer is vanishingly rare. What are we eating today? We've gone from 140 to 40 to 4 grams of prebiotic fiber a day. The good bacteria have died out. They've been replaced by different microbes that, instead of eating fibers, prefer to eat proteins. Where do they get the proteins from? They consume mucins, which are these very rather odd proteins that form the mucus layer. They form this gel, this slime, the mucus layer, which covers the lining of the gut and protects it. So the proteolytic bacteria, which are now running rampant, they consume the mucus layer, and then they come into direct contact with our cells. And because many of these bacteria are gram-negative, they cause intense inflammatory stress. They're killing off the cells that line the colon. They're also separating. They're losing their cohesion. The tight cell junctions are opening up. Now you have what is known as leaky gut. And now toxic macromolecules such as lipopolysaccharides are entering the blood system. This is called endotoxemia. This leads very directly, I'm so sorry, to metabolic dysregulation. Everyone's a critic. I'm sorry about that. Okay, this leads very directly to MASLD, what we used to call non-alcohol related fatty liver disease, and it leads directly to coronary artery disease, essential hypertension, neuroinflammatory stress, and a whole range of psychological malbehaviors that spin off from that. So what we're doing, we're looking at the impact of putting a blend of prebiotic fibers into the diet and then seeing a reduction in the markers of dysbiosis that you can pick up in blood. In fact, in a dried blood spot. The importance of this is that people used to test for the microbiome very ineffectively by sending samples of poop to the scientists who were doing the studies. Now, you can do this if you're actually in the lab, but you can't send samples of poop through the mail. The mail systems, for some reason, take a dim view of this. They don't like it very much. And it's just, you really don't want to think too much about this. But you can send dried blood spot samples through the mail if you use the right packaging. It's inoffensive, it's stable, and that can go to a lab where we can measure whether or not you have normal colonic epithelial barrier function or not. If you don't, you have a problem. Clearly, all kinds of problems. We can put that right by putting the right types of prebiotic fibers back in the diet. Test yourself again a couple of weeks later. and you've gone from the red into the green. That's the test that we're working on. It's in alpha phase at the moment. We'll have one version of it to release before the end of the year, and it will become progressively more sophisticated over the next 12 to 18 months.
I love it. We are excited about that. But but I'm excited about what Xenobiotic already does, because it is these prebiotics and they're feeding all those microbiome, and it's just feeding the good ones and not the bad ones. So we're getting that where we have too many of the bad kind, or the ones that we don't want down there, to getting now more and more of the good ones. And that's healing the gut, which means when you're healing the gut, your body can start to heal itself again. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that we have around the world today is gut health. Now, Dr. Paul, some people are going to say, well, if you don't have the probiotics working for you the way they're supposed to, why don't you just take probiotics then?
You can, but they don't work. I mean, EFSA hasn't agreed to a single health claim linked to the probiotic species. And you see, the problem is, if you take a probiotic, you'll take a capsule which says, oh, it's got 10 billion colony-forming units per tablet or per capsule or whatever. And that seems like a big number, but it's not. If you compare it to the vastly larger number of microbes that inhabit the large intestine. So you're sending in a very small number of these lab-grown cosseted bacteria into a very hostile, very aggressive environment, which has been thoroughly colonized by millions of more, orders of magnitude greater numbers of microbes which resent these incomers and fight them off. So the microbes that you're taking in your probiotic they don't settle. This is known as colonization resistance. And a really good study was done in London about 6 years ago, showing that if you take a probiotic capsule, while you're taking it, we can identify small numbers of those microbes in a stool sample. The day after you stop taking that probiotic, they've gone. They don't linger. And one reason why they don't take is that typically you're not sending in the fuel that they need, which is the prebiotic fiber. There is one company that has gone down this road. They produce a symbiotic. They're called Symrise, and they have combined a probiotic with a prebiotic and produced a product which I think tastes absolutely horrible, but it has generated some pretty good results in IBS patients.
But I know what you have is a whole bunch of different prebiotics in there. And why all the different prebiotics? Because most of the prebiotics you see in a store just have one exact prebiotic in it. Why so many different kinds? How many different kinds of prebiotics are in the Xenobiotic?
Well, I've calculated on the basis of some pretty simple math that you probably need between 4 and 5 different fibers as an entry-level product. And the reason for that is that once these fibers enter the lower intestine, you have to remember that it's not static. It's a dynamic model. They're moving through the colon. And so you need to have some very rapidly acting fibers that will start to engineer this switch towards the saccharolytic probiotic species very early on in the ascending colon. These fibers tend to be very short molecules. They're small molecules. They ferment very quickly, but they're used up very quickly. So you need to have progressively larger amounts of progressively larger and more complex fibers, which ferment more slowly. And so the very small molecules start the process, and it's like the blue touch paper on a firework. And then as that cohort of microbes moves down the intestine, you need to accompany them with progressively longer and slower fermenting fibers so they have something to metabolize and grow on as they pass through the colon. And I remember when I first started designing this, it was on the back of an envelope, although in my defense it was a very large envelope. And I was working on what were the fermentation rates for these different fibers, what was the therapeutic index of each fiber, what was the colonic transportation or transit rate. And sort of I was juggling with these sorts of numbers until I came up with Xenobiotic. And I think as much as by luck, as good management, it came out with a blend that people seem to tolerate very well, and that based on the responses that we're seeing is able to effectively repopulate the entire colon. That is the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon, all the way through to the rectum. I think that this is probably the most elegant formulation that I've ever put together, and it's a little bit like the red-headed stepchild in a way, because Xeno is all about balanced oil. I think xenobiotic is every bit as important.
I agree. And I think it is so powerful to be taking balance soil and xenobiotics together because that is making such a huge difference. So I'm going to add one more topic on here that we have talked about, and that's the third driver. So we've got the type B malnutrition. Now we have a vitamin product called Extend, and
Don't call it a vitamin product.
You're right. And I don't know what to say about it because we call it food because it's more like food than any other vitamin supplement. Let's put that off because people need food and they used to have a lot of calories and they used to get a lot of nutrients. And actually, this doesn't work like any of the vitamins that don't work. This works like food. Can you explain Extend?
Okay. Well, we know that multivitamins and multiminerals don't really do anything. They've been tested to extinction. And, the more people troll through the data, desperately trying to find something positive that these things do, they've been very disappointing. And you have to ask yourself, well, why, if the diet's so bad, why don't these types of supplements help? And the answer is there is a lot more to these types of cofactors than just the current orthodox list of vitamins and trace elements. If you know your medical history, that list has grown and shrunk over the years, and even in its current form, it's not an end state. It's going to continue to evolve. You can start off with what is known about the classically defined vitamins and trace elements, but we know that there are many categories of phytonutrients which are also extremely important for your long-term health. So, lycopene, lutein, zeaxanthin, so the xanthophylls and carotenoids are really important. We know that the different types of polyphenols, which have different distributions, patterns in the body, are extremely important. Pluripotent molecules that do a lot of things. The modern diet is very low in both of these subcategories of phytonutrients, so we put them in. What else is missing? Well, 1316 beta-glucans are important immunomodulatory compounds that definitely used to be present in the Victorian diet, for example, but have gone from the modern diet for various reasons, leaving us immunologically compromised, more vulnerable to infection, and far more at risk of allergy. So we've put that in there too, and a couple of other things as well. This is, again, I talked about moving away from magic bullets. There's no point in taking an effervescent vitamin C tablet every day. I mean, that's an act of faith. It's not one of science. You need an awful lot of different things to enable the metabolism to work optimally or broadly speaking, correctly. I threw into this everything but the kitchen sink. Everything I could fit into those 4 tablets. Is it complete? No, I'll admit to you that it isn't. There's a couple of other things I really would like to include. The problem is that the tablets start getting to the point where you can't choke them down anymore, or you have to use 5 or 6 tablets. And who's going to eat 6 tablets a day, except possibly a Californian? With apologies to all the Californians present. So it's a compromise. It's a compromise at the end of the day.
Okay.
But it's the best compromise I could come up with.
Well, we're proud of that Extend tablets that we are taking. So we have our health protocol, which is actually working in regards to all 4 of these drivers. And
No. We don't address this aspect, this glycemic mismatch, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. We don't address that. That's something that we leave up to, the seeker after health, which means less sugar, less starch, more physical exercise, weight loss if appropriate. And all kinds of people have shown that when you do that, type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome are reversed. Absolutely reversed. And this has been known ever since the work of Bouchardet, the father of diabetes, who found that during the siege of Paris, this is the 19th century, Germany and France were having one of their regular family quarrels. So the Germans are all around Paris. Paris is besieged, no food. The Parisians respond by eating the entire contents of the Parisian zoo, but that doesn't stop them from losing weight. They're short on calories. And Apollinaire Bouchardet notices that all of his diabetic patients are recovering. So, all of this has been known. It's been known forever. It was swept under the carpet by the pioneering work of Banting and Best, and then insulin, and then the pharmaceutical industry jumps on board. But really, for these types of conditions, it's lifestyle changes that you should be focusing on. Now, for those who can't or won't mend their wicked ways and start eating less sugar and carbs and taking more exercise, there are hacks. There are hacks, which I talk about in my blog. And if anyone is interested in this, check out the blog and you'll see all kinds of references to what these hacks might be.
And I did put the blog in the chat here. It will also be in the chat as we stream live on Facebook. If you don't have it, it is drpaulclayton.eu. There's so much on there. You put away the next couple of weeks to keep following the things that he does. So Dr. Paul, we want to really sum up here. So to get started, now we'll come out with our gut health test here by the end of the year, but that balance test, I just want everyone to understand how important knowing the number of the omega-6/3 is, how important it is to know that number, what they're getting out of it, and actually that they can do something about it. It's unique. It is really known that what it means. I mean, the science behind the omega-6/3 imbalance and how important it is for your health, and we can do something about it. Paul?
Well, as you said, it's critically important. It's really a large part of your overall risk of ill health. And by switching off chronic inflammatory stress immediately, you reduce the risk of many chronic degenerative diseases. The balance test is your guide. It will help you to move in the right direction in order to achieve those better health prospects.
I love
End of story.
And go ahead.
Well, no, I think we're probably running out of time. And I just wanted to say, I understand that there's quite a lot of medical and scientific personnel on the call. I'm really happy that you're here. If there's time for hard-hitting questions and answers, I would love to throw the floor open so that various people can put their points of view and argue against, the case that I've been trying to make.
Well, I'm not sure if we really have time for that. How about if we do this, Dr. Paul? How about if we have you on in a couple weeks where those who have watched this, we're going to open it up and let everybody ask you questions. We'll do a question and A time here in a couple weeks. We'll put that down and do that. Okay?
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, could I just say I look forward to learning as much from everyone else in the audience. This is a two-way street.
Then that's what we'll do. We'll mark the date. So whoever invited you here, we are going to have a follow-up here where it will be question and answer time, and we'll put aside the time to do so. So summing up, Zinzino's health protocol. Just taking our health protocol, I guess maybe we should mention the importance of Viva on there, because I can tell you, as you know, that's one of my favorite products, Dr. Paul, is how important to add that if people have stress, mood, and sleep issues, to put a Viva product on there. Maybe just could we do a short version on Viva and how important or what that is really doing?
Very short. Stress is endemic. Stress is a killer. What can we do about it? It affects our sleep, our health, everything. The first person to write about this was a Persian polymath called Avicenna. That's the Greek version of his name, Ibn Sina. And he wrote about the use of saffron in his Canons of Medicine, which were published, I think, around about 1000 AD. And he to treat conditions that we would now describe as anxiety and depression. Then about 25 years ago, a group of physicians in Iran, which is Persia, as was, started looking at the ethnobotany of their country, and they reproduced Avicenna's work, they looked at, in a controlled clinical trial setting, the impact of saffron on these types of conditions, and they found that it was as effective as any of the modern drugs in treating anxiety or depression, but without any of the downsides. So non-addictive, non-habituating, no adverse effects, no chronic vomiting, no sudden urges to pick up an AK-15 and go and shoot up everyone at the local school or post office. So this is a really interesting and highly effective natural product, which is extremely good at alleviating low mood states and treating anxiety. It's phenomenally effective and extremely safe. And we use a validated version of this in Viva.
I absolutely love it. So for those of you who are following along here in regards to what Zinzino is doing, is really creating that health protocol to make a total difference in your health. So do take a balance test, find out what your cells are trying to tell you about your health, and find out what the health protocol is going to do to change that, because we can fix it. And
could I just say, I see an old friend of mine, Anthony Leeds.
Yeah.
Tony, so good to see you.
Actually, I know there's other doctors on here that are really excited. I know Stuart Tomp's on here, and we're going to put all you guys on here next time and get some of these questions. So look forward to the next call here with Dr. Paul Clayton as a follow-up for today. And this is exciting. Dr. Paul, I just want the one final question on what you see if we could really work to make a difference in the world, and we got as many people on this health protocol, what would we see happening in the world? Could you just answer that one before we go?
We're going to close down a lot of hospitals and put a lot of doctors out of work. And we're going to create a public health landscape utterly and completely different from the one that we see today, which is so disfigured by chronic degenerative disease. We're going to hand over the control of people's health back to them. I think what we will do is to create generations of human beings who will be much healthier, much more functional, much more able to develop their full biological potential than the poisoned and crippled populations that surround us today.
Boom. We're going to leave it at that, Dr. Paul. That was powerful. It gets me pumped because I know we are on a mission to make the world a healthier place. This global issue of health, we can do something about here in Zinzino. So we just need to get out and tell more people. So for those of you who have been following along today, I am going to allow everyone here to unmute and look for the next time that we are going to have Dr. Paul on. Get your questions ready. If you are one of those health professionals, we might be pulling you on to do a fun, maybe a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of ping pong when he's on here next time. So thanks everybody for being on. I'm going to let everybody unmute. So thank you for being on. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your time. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Awesome.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much.
Gracias, Carla. Gracias, doctor. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul.
Gracias.
Thank
you.
Welcome, dear.
Thank you. Bye bye.
No, pues sí.